Hi, it's Marylee again with another one of my little stories, A Full Moon at Lee's Bluff. I mentioned last week when I did my story that we'd rented this cabin. It was actually in 1975. It was one room and a path, and I don't mean bath, if you know what I mean. The spring bluebells grew in the area surrounding the cabin. Our first major project that year was to build something at the end of that path. We decided to build an extra large outhouse. It would provide space for our fishing, boating, and swimming items. One corner would be for our outdoor plumbing, okay? We called this special building the shed house, okay? Kind of a little joke there. My husband's next building project was to build a wooden sidewalk made out of cedar boards so they'd last a long time from the cabin to the shed house, okay? Bill then built a set of steps made of treated lumber, which went down this steep bank to the river. Our cabin neighbors, who had spent many years there before we had, every one of them would walk by the cabin and they'd say, "Those steps won't hold. The river's gonna take them out." Poor old Bill. He must have felt like Noah when he was trying to build the ark. Bill just kept building the steps and driving those posts even deeper every time somebody told him that the river was going to take it out. However, I knew something about Bill that the rest of them didn't know. He was a perfectionist, but he was always safe rather than sorry. If something called for a thumbtack, I'm here to tell you Bill used a railroad spike. To this day, those steps, some of them are still in that bank. I was down there a couple of years ago, and my son, the gate was locked to where those cabins used to be, and my son walked over there and he came back with a couple boards. He said, "Dad, steps are still hanging on over there. Some of them are anyway." That's 44 years ago. Can you imagine? In the mid-1980s, a flood washed away all 13 of our cabins. Our little blue cabin washed across this 80-acre hayfield and rested on a little knoll in the field. I'm telling you, it looked pretty sad, all crooked, laying over in that hayfield. The inside of the cabin was covered with this thick mud everywhere. Using a stick, our son wrote in the mud on that kitchen counter that had its mud covering it, "Who says we're in control?" That has a pretty good message, doesn't it? I cried and asked our landlord if maybe he could skid the cabin back over on the riverbank. It was a big event the day that we drug that cabin back to the river. The only thing left on that riverbank was those steps. Bill's steps was all there. Don't you know, I decided while we were moving we might, well, pick out a better spot on the river. Maybe that wouldn't happen again. So we did. We moved to this spot and it had a big old cedar tree there. Well, Bill got the bright idea he was going to tie that cabin to that cedar tree, and he did. But the neighbors kept discouraging us, and they was always thought that everything he did wasn't going to work, you know. Bill was a workaholic, always busied himself with projects. The kids and I had painted the cabin a real pretty country blue. I think the theme really came from those bluebells that we first discovered there on that bank. We had an inside we fixed it up real cute too. I had curtains at all the windows. I had even made a curtain changing room in one corner. It took us a while to get it cleaned up after that flood, I can't tell you. We cabled the cabin, like I said, to that big old cedar, and he thought this would keep it from ever floating away again in another flood. We didn't work all the time while we were at the cabins. Bill would have if you'd let him work, because he just work. But the kids and I would pull Bill off the latest project to do some exploring and fishing. Our cabin was located on what appeared to be a long, still, deep hole of water in between two chutes, riffles, you know, like swift water. The riffles are actually located where the river would bend or become narrow. Now let me tell you this one. Some locals, and it took me a while to figure out what they was trying to say, some locals down there called it where the river gnars. And I finally figured out they was trying to say narrow. At least that was what it sounded like to me. These individual holes between the riffles acquired special names representing a stretch of the river to us. And that's what we called each one of them. Our stretch of river where we were on was the cabin hole. That's where the cabins were. The one above it was the Bluff hole, because there's some big bluffs up there. There was another one called the Zebco and another called the Frying Pan. This is where we had found stuff that people had turned over and lost, and we picked it up out of the river. The one above, the items that we found were always near those real swift chutes, because that seemed to be where you'd turn over. Someone had lost them when their boats overturned. The gar hole, oh, let me tell you about that gar hole. That thing used to scare me to death. Those gars were so big, they looked like they was big as the canoe. Now, you know, I'm not much afraid of anything, but that big old thing swimming up alongside of me, it always kind of scared me. There was another hole called the Fish Traps, and that was as far upstream as we would go when we paddled up. One of our favorite holes of water was called Lee's Bluff. When we were at the cabin for our week of vacation, we would sometimes camp at Lee's Bluff. I got to go down there not too many more years ago, and it's still just such the most beautiful place. We camped there one time in the full moon, and oh, that was awesome. Lee's Bluff is a sheer bluff about 300 feet high. It almost resembles a natural outdoor movie screen, like cut out kind of in those limestone stone bluffs. It's just awesome. The full moon lit it up as though it were illuminated that time that we stayed in the full moon. We made our camp on that rock bar across from the bluff. I fried up the fresh fish that we caught that day. We enjoyed our river supper as we gazed at the awesome beauty all evening of Lee's Bluff. It was almost like something out of a dream until our visitors arrived. Let me tell you, there were thousands of them too. Mosquitoes everywhere. Our youngest son and I took refuge in the tent immediately. Bill and our oldest son, Eddie, built a campfire in their attempt to ward off those mosquitoes, the intruders. I did not know until we got our pictures back. You know, we live in a different world now. We take pictures with these cameras or your phones. You see them right away. But back then, you had to take pictures and get them developed. Well, I didn't know this picture had been taken. I'm going to show it to you after a while. Our Eddie had climbed to the very top, 300 feet, to the top of Lee's Bluff real early in the morning. He had taken pictures of our tent, the canoes, and smoke circling the campfire. They turned out to be beautiful pictures. Now, Eddie has been a federal ranger for many years, living in Yosemite National Park first. He was there, and then he was sent to the Grand Tetons in Moose, Wyoming, or Jackson Hole, and then he was sent back to Yosemite National Park, and right now he's second in command at West Glacier National Park in Montana. So he's kind of been all over the place. But at that time he was at Yosemite. He is also a renowned mountain rock climber all over the world. He's climbed the Eiger in the Swiss Alps and a lot of other mountains, but that Eiger he even did it in the wintertime, which scared me to death. But he got back home fine. I do believe that boy might have cut his teeth on that rock climbing one early morning years ago at Lee's Bluff on the beautiful St. Francis River. In later years, I had a picture professionally made into a large picture. When I went to pick it up, they said, "Where is that in Colorado?" I proudly told them that was taken right here in Missouri on the St. Francis River. I was visiting Eddie once when he was at Yosemite when someone said the same thing to him out there. Said, is that Colorado? Eddie said, no, sir. That is a place in my home state of Missouri. We had a cabin on that river when I was a kid. The cabin has become just a memory in the 90s when the flood completely demolished it in 1993. Those who watched this said that old tree held on for a long time, but after a while, both gave way to the pressure of the river, and they both floated on downstream. The only thing left on that riverbank was 2 sets of steps built by a guy named Bill, which was really kind of a joke. But we were down there, like I said, just not too long ago, a couple of years ago, and there's still parts of those, after 44 years, there's still parts of those steps on that river. You know, folks, I've traveled all over this country. I've been to Europe. Missouri is still such a beautiful state. I wish folks would get out and visit our state parks and be blessed with the creation that God has surrounded us with right here, folks, in the Ozarks. And this is a picture, okay? We can get it up there if you can see it. And you can't really see the campsite, or can you see it pretty good maybe? Are they holding it? But there's the campsite where she's putting her finger, yeah. And that was an awesome night, an awesome memory. And, you know, I can look at this picture and kind of almost go there again, so that's pretty cool. So I hope you enjoy Lee's Bluff as much as I did, okay?